Пожалуйста, присоединяйтесь, пока мы предоставим еще пару минут другим педагогам присоединиться, да, мы пока пройдем с вами по основным техническим моментам сегодняшней онлайн-сессии. В первую очередь хотелось бы отметить то, что сессия будет проходить на английском языке. После данной вводной части большая будет просьба к вам в нижней панели вашего экрана, телефона или ноутбука, пожалуйста, найдите функцию перевода и выберите соответствующий канал с английского на русский. Также хотелось бы отметить то, что мы сегодняшнюю сессию с вами записываем для того, чтобы предоставить возможность всем участникам, которые не смогли по какой-то причине принять участие онлайн, возможность просмотреть вебинар, а также ознакомиться с материалами. В связи с чем, если вы не хотите, чтобы вы попадали на запись, пожалуйста, выключите свою камеру и можете спокойно прослушать вебинар. Далее хотелось бы отметить то, что данная запись, да, вебинара и материалы будут у нас расположены на нашем мини-сайте. То есть сегодня нет необходимости фотографировать материалы и так далее. У вас будет возможность в свободное для вас время после вебинара спокойно их просмотреть. Поэтому, пожалуйста, сегодня воспользуйтесь возможностью и максимально задайте интересующие вас вопросы нашим коллегам. В частности, коллегам, которые будут рассматривать все ваши портфолио. Это как раз-таки такая очень ценная возможность для того, чтобы улучшить вашу работу. Давайте мы перейдем к следующему слайду, если вы будете не против. Позвольте очень кратко представить инициативу, в рамках которой мы с вами все встречаемся. То есть мы работаем в рамках инициативы DARYA SCAFFOLD, которая в свою очередь является частью большей инициативы под названием DARYA «Диалог и действия для находчивой молодежи в Центральной Азии», и реализуется она Европейским фондом образования, финансируется Евросоюзом и проводится в регионе Центральной Азии при сотрудничестве со всеми 5 национальными органами, которые ответственны за образование и развитие профессиональных навыков. В частности, наша команда DARYA SCAFFOLD, мы помогаем внедрить компетентностный подход, да, в подготовке проведения ваших занятий посредством инструмента SCAFFOLD. И мы очень рады, то, что с каждым годом количество тренеров и практиков DARYA SCAFFOLD увеличивается. Собственно говоря, сегодняшняя сессия непосредственно направлена на увеличение количества сертифицированных тренеров и практиков SCAFFOLD. И давайте без отлагательств я хотела бы передать слово нашим сегодняшним экспертам, да, Хейзел Исраэл и Эллен Маккаллум, для проведения сессии. У нас в конце сессии, уважаемые участники, будет время, когда мы сможем ответить на все ваши вопросы. Поэтому большая просьба либо во время сессии писать ваши вопросы в чате, либо уже задать их голосом в конце вебинара. Спасибо большое, и теперь передаю слово Хейзел.
Thank you, Victoria. If we could move on to the first slide of the presentation, please. Brilliant, thank you. So good morning, I should say good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to this DARYA SCAFFOLD session. In the previous information session, we focused on the process, the trainer and practitioner pathways, what needs to be submitted, the telegram reflection, the portfolio template, and the deadline. And today we are focusing on something slightly different and possibly more important, which is the quality of the portfolios. So the question today is not simply, have I filled in the template? The more important question is, does my portfolio show what I can do as an educator using SCAFFOLD? So by the end of this hour, you should be able to look at your own portfolio with the eyes of a reviewer and identify the changes that will make it clearer, stronger, and more credible, of a higher quality. So a strong portfolio does not have to be perfect. It does need to be clear, honest, specific, and evidenced. It should help the reviewer understand your teaching decisions, what learners or colleagues actually did during the session, and what you have learned from that experience. Okay, so the bridge from the information session then. Could we change, there we are, no, I think that's the right slide, lovely. So let us start by connecting today's session with the information session. So the previous session answered the question, what do I need to do? And today answers the question, how do I make the work strong enough to be recognised with the badge and a certification? So there are 3 shifts we will keep coming back to. First, not just complete but convincing. And that's about the fact that a completed portfolio is the starting point. But a convincing portfolio helps the reviewer to clearly understand the work and trust the work. Secondly, that the learning and planning in your portfolio is not just described, but also is supported by evidence. So it's not enough to say that learners collaborated or that colleagues engaged. We need to show, how do we know this? How do we know that learners collaborated or that colleagues engaged? Thirdly, then, not just positive, but reflective. So our instinct is always to showcase what is more positive in our practice, and to talk about the things that have worked. But we learn so much more from being open to things that can be improved, areas for development. Reviewers do not expect everything to have gone perfectly. They expect you to notice what worked, what had impact, what was difficult, what did you find challenging, what didn't work at all, and what would you improve? And this is the most important thing. What would you do differently next time? Because we are always looking to improve our practice and learn to be more effective educators and to deliver more effective learning for our students. So what I'd like you to do at this point is to ask you to type one word that makes a portfolio feel strong to a reviewer. If you could type that in the chat, have a think. What do you think makes a portfolio feel strong to a reviewer? We will be going over this together during this webinar. Lovely, yes, yeah. A SWOT analysis is a really useful tool to support reflection, which definitely that sort of 360-degree view of what was strong, perhaps not so strong, what was challenging or threatening, but also what were the opportunities. That's a useful structure to support reflection, which is an important part of a strong portfolio. Yeah, definitely. Also that the portfolio, the information in the portfolio is connected to evidence. So there's concrete evidence of what you claim in your portfolio and in your planning, that the portfolio is clear, it's clear for the reviewer to understand, but also that the descriptions in your portfolio are very specific. to help the reviewer to get a very clear picture of what your session included. If we could move to the next slide then. So what do reviewers actually look for? When reviewers read a portfolio, they're not just counting pages or looking for nice photographs. They're looking for evidence that the scaffold cards have been used thoughtfully. 6 words sort of summarize that quality bar then. You can see them across the top of the slide there. So we have what a reviewer is looking for is that the content is relevant, that it's coherent, that it's specific and evidenced and reflective and original. So relevant means that the lesson or training fits the learner group, subject and context. Coherent here means that the parts of the portfolio connect to each other. Specific means that the reviewer can picture the learners, the activity and the decisions made. Evidenced means claims are supported by learner work, feedback, photographs, observations, or other materials that you have included. Reflective then means that you analyze the experience. You think back over what happened and what went well, like the SWOT analysis you mentioned in the chat. Thank you. It's not just a description, it's evaluative. What was good? What didn't work so well? What could be improved next time, and how would you improve it next time? Then finally, original means that the portfolio represents your own practice and your own professional learning. It's your experience. So the reviewer's key question is, can I see competence development, not just the completion of a series of activities? For example, if you chose creativity, for example, can the reviewer see where the learners generated, developed, or improved ideas? If you chose collaboration, can the reviewer see how the learners worked together and how that was noticed or assessed? How do you know that learners actually really collaborated? So I'm going to ask you to type in the chat again, which of the 6 quality words there, relevant, coherent, specific, evidenced, reflective, and original, which of those 6 quality words will be hardest for you to show in your practice, do you think? Do you think you'll find it easy to address all 6, or is there one that might be more challenging for you? And if that's the case, if you could type it in the chat, please. Is everybody feeling shy or doesn't have access to their keyboard? Or that's okay. If there's nothing that you think you would find challenging, we can move on to the next slide, please, Victoria. So the single biggest theme then of this webinar is about outputs, the difference between outputs and evidence of competence, or alternatively, how we make sure that the outputs actually reflect that development and progression in competence. So this is probably the most important idea in the whole webinar, really. That move from outputs to evidence of competence and competence development and progression. So an output is something that exists. It can be a lesson plan or a training plan, a photograph, a feedback form, a telegram post. And these are necessary, but on their own, they may not prove very much. So evidence of competence is what the output shows, what it demonstrates or evidences. It shows that you selected appropriate competences, designed a suitable activity, assessed starting level or progress, interpreted feedback, and reflected on your own practice. So let me show you the difference. A weak statement might be learners worked in groups and liked the lesson. Imagine that statement in a portfolio. That may be true, but it does not show much about competence development. A stronger statement might be group work helped learners practice collaboration and problem solving. Their final ideas showed progress because they built on each other's suggestions and used peer feedback to improve their plan. Can you see the difference between those two statements? That second version helps the reviewer see what happened and why it matters. Good, lovely, thank you. If we could move on to the next slide, please, Victoria. So, a strong portfolio then has a chain or thread running through it, in that it starts with a need or a context, and that leads to the choice of competences. The choice of competences influence the teaching method. The teaching method shapes the activity, and the activity creates evidence. And it's this evidence that feeds the reflection. So if the chain breaks, the portfolio becomes weaker. For example, a learner need may be clearly described, but the selected competences may not match that need. Or the competence may be appropriate, but the assessment method may only check subject knowledge or understanding, not that competence that we're looking for. Also, the evidence may show that learners were present, but not what they learned or practiced. So a simple quality test is, can your reviewer follow your thinking from the beginning of your planning to the end? And if the answer is yes, the portfolio will feel much, much, much stronger. If we could move on to the next slide, please, Victoria. So the lesson plan then. The lesson plan is often the first place where quality becomes visible. A strong lesson plan does not need to be long, but it does need enough detail for a reviewer to understand the learning experience. So the quality advice then would be, make the learner group specific. Say who they are, their age or level, and any relevant needs. Explain that real life connection. Show, yes, we will show the presentation, yes, definitely. Show what learners actually do at each stage of the lesson. Make the outcomes measurable. Use timings that feel realistic. I struggle with that one, I have to confess. I always try and stuff too much into a session and then run out of time. It's tricky to pitch that the volume then within a lesson. So common mistakes that we've seen when reviewing the portfolios include writing only a general topic, such as environment or communication, without explaining why it matters for this group of students. Another common mistake is listing scaffold cards without explaining how they shape the lesson. Another we've seen is describing only what the teacher will explain rather than what the learners will do. Also, avoid outcomes such as things like learners will understand teamwork, unless you explain what learners will produce, what they'll say, what they will decide, or what they will be able to demonstrate. The best test is of a lesson plan, and certainly when we first started reviewing lesson plans in the first phase of DARYA, we used this test as the sort of most important test of our review. Could a colleague deliver this lesson from your plan? So if not, add more detail about learner activity, timing, expected outputs, and assessment points. Okay, if we could move on to the next slide, please. Victoria, thank you. So the next thing we're going to look at then is choosing competences. So choosing competences is about your professional judgment. It's not about decorating the lesson, planning the lesson first, and then adding the competences in after the plan has been completed. Really, they are the central focus and purpose of the learning design. That's the primary purpose is to develop these identified competencies. The whole of the scaffold experience is about delivering effective competence-based learning. So the first thing we would say would be for you to choose between 2 and 5 competencies, only because they genuinely matter for the learning plan. Fewer competencies with stronger explanation is much better than lots and lots of competencies with no evidence, with no good reasoning. For each chosen competence, we recommend that you ask, why this competence? Why these learners? Why this topic? Where in the lesson will learners practice it? And how will I know that they've been practicing this competence? So a common mistake we've come across, so just to emphasize, and again, if I didn't say why enough times in the last explanation, the why is almost more important than the what, really. It's your rationale, it's your reason for selecting the competencies that you have. In what ways are they relevant and beneficial to your learners? So a common mistake we've come across then is copying the competence card text and stopping there. No rationale, no explanation of why it's relevant to learners or important to this particular group of learners. And another common mistake is choosing competencies that sound impressive but do not actually appear in the activity. And perhaps the most common mistake we find with competencies is choosing too many. And this can make the portfolio feel unfocused, or that the portfolio has just been sprayed with competencies, because it's definitely not the case that you will be able to effectively develop, practice, develop, improve, and assess many competencies in one lesson. We can only focus on a smaller number of competencies at any one time. So a helpful sentence frame is, I chose this competence because learners needed to. They practiced it when they completed a particular activity. The evidence was observation or questioning or something that the learners produced. And this one sentence often strengthens the portfolio immediately because it connects the choice with the activity and the evidence. So at its simplest, you can see the stem at the bottom of the slide there. So I chose these competencies because learners needed to. And then when they complete, which activities are they practicing, which competences in, and the evidence was, what did they produce, what did they actually do. Okay, we could move on to the next slide, please, Victoria. So we're moving on to assessment then, and the starting level, and we'll follow the same format in terms of some advice and the common mistakes we have come across reviewing the portfolios. So assessment in the portfolio has two important roles. First of all, it helps you understand the starting level of your students. And secondly, it helps you to notice progress or achievement. So the starting level assessment does not need to be complicated, but it should be credible and connected to your selected competence. So examples of simple starting level checks include things like a short question, asking students to rate themselves using self-assessment, maybe asking students to complete a mini task or a concept map. You could have a quick diagnostic discussion or a short example activity. For example, if the competence is collaboration, a starting level check could involve observing how learners share roles in a short task. If the competence is creativity, it could involve asking learners to generate initial ideas and then comparing those with later improved ideas. I think we've got a question from Okila. Yeah, I think you've got your hand up there. Did you want to ask a question or do you want to save it until the end? No? Is your hand up by mistake? Okay. Okay, there we are. Right, no problem. So let's move on from the advice around assessment then to the common mistakes. So a common mistake could include saying, for example, that all learners are beginners without explaining how you know this. How do you know that they're all beginners? Another is assessing only factual recall when the chosen competence is collaboration, creativity, planning, or problem solving. So if the competence is about how learners act, how they think, collaborate, or create, your assessment evidence should look for those things. Okay. So a useful question might be here, what would I see or what would I expect to see or hear if this competence is improved? So can I ask you to type one simple way that you could check starting levels of your students in your own lessons? Ones that you use already, or maybe ones that you would like to try in the future. Simple ways that you could check the starting level in your lesson. Well, we covered some, didn't we? We had a look at one. Baseline questions, asking students to assess themselves or lovely. Very quick survey. Yes, quick questionnaire. Yes. Yeah. Lovely. Any more? Quiz. Yes. 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 Good. Yeah. Just quick to give you a sense that your pitch, how you're aiming, your learning design will address the needs and levels of your students with just the right amount of challenge and support. Now, we want to pitch it just right. And it's often the case with competences. They're not the same as a lesson or a course where everybody starts in the same place and everybody progresses at the same pace. With competences, it's often the case that people are at very different levels and will progress in different ways as well. But yes, those are some really nice examples. Thank you. Thank you for your contributions. Yes, we will. I'm sure we will be able to do that. With a word of caution, with a bit of a health warning. What we would not want is for somebody to use a portfolio to copy it. Not in the sense that they would copy exactly all the information, but yes, I'm sure we can share some examples with you. But what we would need to do first is to get the permission of people who have submitted their portfolios already. So we have some really strong and excellent examples, but we will need to ask the people who submitted those portfolios for their permission if they are willing for us to share. Victoria, do you think that's something that we could do? Where would be the best place to put them, do you think?
The portfolios from the phase 1 are already published on our mini site.
Great. Okay. On the Notion site or in Telegram?
Yes.
On the
I
Notion
will share the link right.
Brilliant. Thank you. There we are. Victoria will be able to share some examples with you for you to look at after the webinar. But we can have a look also in this round of submissions for some really strong examples. We'll get some permission to share those with you. Okay, so let's move on to a training plan then. So this section is mainly for trainer applicants. Practitioner applicants can still listen because the same quality principles apply to sharing scaffold with colleagues. So for the trainer portfolio, reviewers are looking for facilitation quality as well as understanding of scaffold. So a strong training plan shows how colleagues were introduced to scaffold, how they practiced using it, how they discussed application in their own context, and what they were able to take away. So the biggest mistake is delivering a lecture only, just talking from the front. If colleagues only listen to an explanation, it is hard to show that they can use scaffold. So we would recommend building in a hands-on planning activity, a moment for discussion, a short share with feedback, for example. So colleagues might choose competencies for a real lesson, match them with teaching methods, or design a quick assessment approach. But the evidence should show that colleagues engaged with scaffold, not only that they attended a presentation. So their feedback should also tell you something useful about how practical, clear, or relevant the training was. Thank you, Victoria, for sharing that in the chat. Okay. Lovely. So next then we'll look at the reflection and SWOT analysis. So reflection is where, oh, sorry, did I ask you to move on to the next slide? Yes, lovely. Thank you, Victoria. Reflection is where reviewers see your professional learning. You know, that's where it becomes obvious to us what you have gained from that experience. And it's not always, as I've said, about getting it right and the lesson being perfect. In fact, very often It's more about what you've learned from that experience. For example, in Wales, where I live, the country where I live, our inspectorate, we have a body who go around and they inspect the quality of teaching and learning within organisations, within schools, colleges, and universities. And as a result of these inspections, they award grades, like outcomes, if you like. And one of those is the potential to improve. So it's not just about what they saw in terms of a snapshot of quality of teaching and learning, or learner well-being and learner needs. It's also about how capable are these organisations to improve themselves. And this is very much about the reflection. So this is why reflection is so important, because that's the key to your continuous improvement and your professional learning. So your reflection shouldn't simply say that the lesson was successful. It should show that you can describe, analyze, and improve your practice. So in the SWOT analysis, be honest and be specific. So the strengths should be linked to real features of the lesson or training. Weaknesses are not failures. They are evidence that you can identify limitations. Opportunities should show how scaffold could support future practice. Threats should identify realistic barriers, such as, things like time, confidence, curriculum pressure, limited resources, or that colleagues need more support. Common mistakes include writing things like everything went well, repeating the same answer in every SWOT box, describing only external problems, or not naming the next step. Whereas a strong reflection might say, the creativity card helped learners generate ideas, but I did not allow enough time for them to improve those ideas. Next time, I will include a round of peer feedback before the final product. And that second sentence is much stronger because it includes the evidence, it includes professional judgment, and next steps. What action will you take to address any shortcomings? One of the things we came across as well is there's a requirement for the reflection to be a minimum of 100 words. So where people have submitted portfolios with only one sentence, for example, they have been returned, because there's 100-word minimum for that reflection to reflect what we believe to be the importance of this reflection stage. Okay, lovely. If we could move on to the next slide, please, Victoria. So we're going to move on to feedback and evidence. So we'll follow the same format. So evidence becomes powerful when it's selected, when it's labeled, and when it's interpreted. So you do not need to include every photograph or every comment. Choose evidence that helps the reviewer to understand what happened in the session, but also what that evidence demonstrates, whether it's the fact, we've used examples of learners developing and practicing creativity or collaboration. So can we see that from the evidence? Good evidence might include learner feedback, participant feedback, photographs of activities, examples of learner work, scans of completed feedback forms, screenshots of digital survey results, or brief observation notes that you may have taken. But the evidence needs explanation. Why have you included it? What is it evidence of? What is it proving in your learning design? So a photo without a caption may simply show people sitting at tables. whereas a caption can turn it into evidence by explaining the task, the competence being practiced, and the learning. So use a simple caption formula. What happened? Which competence does it relate to? And what the evidence shows. For example, learners use peer questions to improve their community project ideas. This shows creativity and learning through experience from Entrecomp because they revised their first ideas after feedback. So common mistakes include attaching photographs with no explanation, including feedback but not analysing it, selecting only positive comments, or failing to connect that evidence to outcomes. Okay, so if we could move on to the next slide, please, Victoria. So in terms of your Telegram reflection post, then we've got some quick quality tips for you here. The Telegram post is short, but it should still show thoughtful practice. It should include the subject area, the lesson topic, the learner age group, the competences, teaching methods and assessment methods you chose, why you chose them, what was useful, what would you do differently next time, and 4 to 5 photographs where possible to bring that description to life. So the main quality tips then are: write in short, clear paragraphs, name the cards or methods, include one useful result, include one honest change for next time. But perhaps most importantly, remember to tag the post so that we can make the connection between the post and your portfolio. And we've got the tag there at DARYA SCAFFOLD _DM. Avoid a post that only says something like, we used scaffold and it was very interesting. Yes, that's very positive, but it does not show enough professional reflection. A better post says what was useful, why, and what will change next time. Okay, so to recap then, these are the top 10 mistakes that we've come across. So you can assume that each of these statements starts with do not. Okay, so number 1 is do not submit a template with empty sections. Do not choose too many competences. Do not copy the text from the cards without explaining why it's relevant or how it went. Do not describe teacher actions only. We're much more interested in what learners did rather than what the teachers did. Do not forget that starting level assessment. Do not use vague outcomes. Do not attach evidence with no explanation, with no captions. Do not report feedback without analysing it and saying what it means to you and your planning. Do not write reflection that is only positive. And do not submit copied or non-original work. So this list here then is not designed to make the process feel difficult. It's designed to give you a practical editing checklist. Most of these mistakes can be fixed very quickly once you know what to look for. Okay, what we've done as well is, so moving beyond the technical checklist, let's look at a quality check. You can ask yourself 6 questions before submission. First is the chain check. Can I trace need to competence, to activity, to assessment, to evidence and reflection? Secondly, the evidence check. Does each evidence item have a purpose and a short explanation? Third, then, the specificity check. Could a reviewer understand my learners, my context, and the choices I've made in my design? Fourth, the reflection check. Have I named what I learned and what I will change next time? Fifth, the originality check. Is this my own experience with any sources acknowledged? Finally, then, the reader check. Would a colleague understand and trust this portfolio without me having to provide additional explanations? Does it stand on its own? If you can answer yes to these questions, your portfolio will be much stronger. So, for the next short moment, think about your portfolio and choose one section of your portfolio to improve. You can choose a competence explanation, an evidence caption, or a reflection about what you will do next. The aim is not to complete the whole portfolio now. The aim is to identify one visible improvement immediately. So might that be sort of option A then? Strengthen one competence explanation by adding why it fits your learners, your topic, and your activity. Or option B, strengthen one evidence caption, for example, by explaining what the photograph, the work sample, or feedback shows. Or we have another one, strengthen one reflection by changing a general comment into a specific next action. So you can share your improved sentence in the chat or simply write the section that you chose. If you'd like, which of these could you do immediately following this webinar? Oh, sorry, if we could move on to the next slide, Victoria. Sorry, I forgot to ask you to swap it over there. So you've got the three options. One small thing you could do immediately after this webinar. Okay. So if we could go on to the final slide, please, Victoria. So to close then, remember that a strong portfolio tells the story of your practice with Scaffold. It does not need to be perfect, but it does need to be clear, honest, evidenced, and yours. So before you submit a portfolio, ask, what can the reviewer see from this portfolio? What can they understand? What can they trust? And if the reviewer can see your choices, understand your context, and trust your evidence, your portfolio will be much stronger. And you've already done the most important work by using Scaffold and trying it out with learners, and for trainers, sharing it with colleagues. The portfolio is how you make that professional learning visible. And we can now use the remaining time for questions about quality, evidence, reflection, or final improvements before submission. Does anybody have any questions? We've also prepared for you, I should say, a downloadable checklist that you can use once you feel that you've completed the preparation of your portfolio. You can use this quick checklist to make sure that you're avoiding common pitfalls, that you've included the focus that we're looking for. Thanks, Victoria, for sharing it in the chat. Does anybody have any questions or comments? But we can also share the presentation with you following today's webinar.
Уважаемые участники, пока вы формируете свои вопросы, хотелось бы просто еще раз отметить, что уже готовые портфолио ваших коллег, которые получили статус тренера или практика Scaffold, они доступны на нашем мини-сайте. Ссылку на данную страницу мы разместили сейчас в чате в предпоследнем сообщении. Вы можете пройти по ссылке и там по тегам найти работы. То есть если вы претендуете на бейдж тренера, пожалуйста, найдите тег тренера. Если вы получаете бейдж практика, то, соответственно, выберите соответствующий документ с тегом практика. Вот, и как раз там будут доступны все портфолио, которые коллеги успешно сдали и получили свой бейдж. И сейчас, если у вас есть именно конкретные вопросы по вашей работе, пожалуйста, воспользуйтесь этой возможностью и задайте вопросы.
Подскажите, можно будет задать вопрос по поводу конкурса, который проходил в прошлом году? И было объявление о том, что победители и те работы, которые были высоко оценены членами жюри, для тех участников будут предоставлены бейджики, но никакой информации об этом до сих пор не поступило.
Вы имеете в виду конкурс DARYA SCAFFOLD или конкурс от ЕФО?
Был конкурс предоставления плана урока.
Давайте мы сможем с вами по этому поводу отдельно связаться. Давайте я сейчас запишу, и мы сможем с вами обсудить
Вика,
этот вопрос.
извиняюсь, можно вопрос? Какой конкурс? Я не слышала.
Это было, результаты были 23 июня 2025 года. Был проведен самый первый конкурс. Участники должны были предоставить план урока. И, насколько я помню, в группе обсуждалось, что победителям и тем, кого высоко оценили, те, кто получил высокую оценку жюри, и победителей будет предоставлена информация о бейджиках.
Дело в том, что у меня казахские группы, поэтому я не отправила. Только на русском отправить должна быть.
Так, давайте, коллеги, Валерия, относительно конкурса мы с вами сможем связаться отдельно, потому что у нас сегодня сессия конкретно посвящена текущим портфолио педагогов. Ответ на вопрос Айнур. Здравствуйте еще раз. Ваши, то есть занятия вы можете проводить на национальном языке. То есть здесь нет необходимости проводить его обязательно на русском. Единственная просьба – это то, чтобы вы саму портфолио заполняли на русском, а сопутствующие материалы, если у вас занятие проходило на национальном языке, вы можете их предоставить на национальном языке. Просто само содержание портфолио, желательно, чтобы оно было на русском. Почему? Потому что вы знаете, что у нас все работы публикуются, и для того, чтобы коллеги из других стран могли ознакомиться с вашим опытом имплементации Scaffold, желательно, чтобы работа была на русском.
Можно, если я отправлю свой план, рабочий учебный план, успею конкурс?
Нет, смотрите, Айнур, у нас сейчас не конкурс, у нас сейчас идет именно прием заявок на получение бейджа. То есть это не конкурс, то есть вы не конкурируете с кем-то, вы готовите свою работу, где вы описываете свой опыт имплементации и работу с коллегами со скаффолдом. Вот, то есть это не конкурс. Очень важно здесь отметить, то есть здесь не конкурсная основа.
Добрый день. Значит, портфолио только на русском языке, да? Не на казахском.
Да, то есть смотрите, портфолио должно быть на русском языке, когда как занятие и сессию с коллегами вы можете проводить на национальном языке. То есть если у вас, допустим, занятия проходят на национальном языке, пожалуйста, вы можете их проводить на национальном языке. Самое главное, чтобы описание, то есть все портфолио, оно было на русском.
Все понятно, спасибо.
Коллеги, может быть, у вас какие-то точечные вопросы есть относительно элементов портфолио, свод-анализ и так далее? Пожалуйста, вы можете задать вопросы. So Hazel, there's one question. Светлана, здесь, наверное, я могу вам помочь с ответом на вопрос. Если вы претендуете на бейдж-тренера, вам необходимо сдать как план занятия для обучающихся, то есть для студентов, так и план тренинга с коллегами. То есть не один из двух вариантов, а оба, если вы претендуете на бейдж-тренера. Если вы претендуете на бейдж-практика, вам необходимо предоставить только план занятий.
Это все в портфолио надо указать, да?
Да, то есть портфолио у нас полная инструкция размещена на нашем сайте, то есть мы сейчас тоже эту ссылку продублируем. Там в самом документе, шаблоне портфолио уже все разбито по блокам. То есть первый блок у вас план задания, второй блок это тренинг по скаффолд с коллегами, то есть там именно смысловые блоки есть, которые вы можете запомнить.
Все понятно.
Вопрос вот от Мадины. Можно ли отправить документы на бейдж-тренера до 10 июня? Да, 10 июня – это крайний срок подачи. Здесь также стоит отметить, что как бы у нас могут быть еще плюс к вам дополнительные вопросы. То есть если где-то вы что-то недораскрыли, допустим, да, какой-то ответ, мы можем вернуться к вам для того, чтобы вы доработали свою работу. То есть это тоже с нашей стороны важно отметить. Дедлайн для обоих подач, то есть как на бейдж-тренера, так и на бейдж-практика у нас 10 июня. То есть вот как раз-таки с этой целью у нас сегодня такая сессия, посредством которой вы сможете именно улучшить качество своего портфолио, потому что до этого мы уже с вами проводили информационную сессию, где мы вам объясняли технические шаги, да, а сейчас уже более такие, как бы сессия посвящена качеству вашего портфолио. Пожалуйста, коллеги, у вас есть ли еще какие-то вопросы дополнительные? Повторюсь, сейчас хорошая возможность точечно спросить, задать вопросы относительно непосредственно вашей работы. Также хотелось бы отметить, если у вас будут вопросы после, вы можете всегда с нами связаться, то есть либо через группу в Telegram, либо в той или иной степени мы с вами со всеми взаимодействовали, то есть посредством почты, посредством WhatsApp, посредством Telegram. Поэтому, если и после сессии у вас будут вопросы, пожалуйста, не стесняйтесь, связывайтесь с нами, мы готовы вам помочь.
Thank you, Victoria. Thanks, everybody, for your attention and your contributions today. Great. I hope you found it useful. We look forward to receiving and reviewing your portfolios.
Да, спасибо большое всем, кто принял участие. И мы так понимаем, что вопросов больше нет. Повторюсь, очень благодарна вам за участие на этой сессии. Надеемся, что мы получим ваши работы до указанного дедлайна. Напоминаю, что запись сегодняшней сессии, а также презентация, которую вы сегодня видели, они будут доступны вам для просмотра сегодня в течение дня, то есть они будут у нас опубликованы в нашей телеграм-группе, а также на нашем мини-сайте. Поэтому большая просьба к вам не пропустить анонс данной ссылки и потом ознакомиться с материалами. Спасибо всем большое. На этом мы готовы завершить сегодняшнюю сессию. Желаем вам доброго вечера.
Спасибо огромное.
Да, будем ждать вашей работы. Спасибо всем большое.
Спасибо организаторам тоже большое, спасибо и участникам.
Нет.